welcome to the CJ Scott this particular weekend it is. We're so glad that you're tuned in. Let us know where you're tuned in from. As always, we bring to you the discussions that you want to have, and it is never too early or too late to talk about the matters that matter to you. I'm your host, CJ Atemo, so I'm looking forward to having a great interaction with you. As always, we say we set up the panel of the jury, but the verdict remains to be yours. Today, we are talking about the matter of schools. Well, schools are reopening, or are they? And we want to know, are we even ready? I mean, who gives a notice of less than a month to just open up schools after nearly 6 to 7 months of children staying at home? Before I bring in my panel, I want you to go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel CJ Atemo. So please go ahead and do that right now. Follow CJ Scott on all social media platforms, on Instagram at CJ Scott Official. Same for Twitter, and CJ Scott on Facebook as well. I've got two ladies and one gentleman, but because the gentleman is sitting farthest, he was here when we were talking about homeschooling. Actually, two of them were, so we just have one new guest, but he was here before. Jasper, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good to have you.
Yeah, good to be back as well.
For the purposes of those who are watching you for the first time on this platform, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, as you've already introduced me, my name is Jasper Ondimu. I am a teacher at Light Academy, Karen, and I'm also engaged in research in matters of education.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Then we have got Esther Azinga. She was here as well. Have you been here 2 times?
Yes, 2 times.
All right. But there may be somebody who's watching you for the very first time. Yeah.
My name is Esther Azinga. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. I'm a teacher at KAG East University and a high school teacher by profession, and I do English Swahili translation.
All right.
Thank you.
That makes us very scared over here, because hope you won't be marking our grammar on set. And then closest to me, I've got a nominated MCA in Machakos County. I was trying to find out how well we are doing, because I've got some interest in Syokimau. So I'm supposed to belong to Machakos County. I was trying to have off-the-cuff conversations, but Honorable Angela Munyasya, I said that well, right?
Yes, you do.
Welcome to the show, and can you just introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Angela Munyasya. I work for Machakos County Assembly as a nominated member of County Assembly, having previously worked in Central Bank of Kenya for close to 30 years.
My good God. There's a lot of experience here, because Esther, you worked as a teacher before.
Yes.
For the TSC. For how long was
9
that?
9 years.
9 years?
Yes.
And then you
And then
moved.
English Swahili translation I've done since 2003 up to now.
Okay.
Those are many years.
Yes. That's 17. That's 17 years. But we just had this discussion the other day going on, and then there was an announcement that schools are reopening, or rather they're preparing for the reopening. There has been a back and forth concerning that, because initially there was a talk of maybe September, then it was maybe January, then in September, then we hear teachers meeting or reporting to their stations to prepare for the reopening of schools, because schools are opening in October. What's going on?
Thank you, CJ. I can go first.
Right.
Indeed, we are in a very, I can call it a catch-22 situation, because the government seems to be going ahead to reopen the school, because indications are there. The teachers were told to report on 28th. And that means that the schools are likely to open very soon. And then we've been asking questions that, are we ready to reopen? First, we closed schools in March after Kenya confirmed its first case. Right. And then we hoped that the government was going to take this break, that opportunity, to ensure that they fix some of the ills that have been bedeviling the education sector.
Right.
The issue about infrastructure, issues about equity. We hoped that the government was going to take this break to be able to handle those matters.
Right.
To the contrary, nothing has been done until now, except I think they're mentioning about the making of desks. That is what we know as of now, when we expected the government to have a robust plan in the reopening of schools. You look at countries like Egypt, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire that have opened schools. There were elaborate plans that were put in place in case of a second wave, in case of resurgence, what are they going to do? But here in Kenya, I think we've been seeing the CS, whom I can say is out of touch with what the common mwananchi feels, with what the education stakeholders feel, because there is really a lot that is not in order as we plan to reopen the schools.
When you say that the CS is out of touch, doesn't he rely on technocrats? Doesn't he have people as well that would be feeding him information? Doesn't he have foot soldiers in the counties and right down to the what used to be called the locations, the sub-locations? Doesn't he have people?
You look at the Ministry of Education, most reforms in the Ministry of Education have been about personalities. You look at when, for example, Fred Matiang'i was in the Ministry of Education, things were moving, parents were really satisfied with him. Talk about the exam leakage, was able to deal with that. So the reforms in the ministry have been more dependent on an individual compared to what we are seeing the CS right now. Because most parents, I can tell you, are not happy with the CS. He's saying that the schools are going to open. Most of them have lost jobs. Most of them are on pay cuts. And therefore, they need time to prepare themselves. So when I'm saying that the CS is out of touch, is to the context that, for example, when you say about opening of schools, things are not in order. The private schools, some have collapsed.
True.
These children, they don't have anywhere to go. I saw the CS saying that they will go to public schools. But that is a really a casual statement, which when you look at the nitty-gritties, it might not really stand a test. So there is a lot that is not in order, which the CS is not telling us, that you'll expect of any responsible leader to take the people step by step as far as the reopening is concerned.
All right.
Actually, the way I see it is that many parents have been apprehensive about taking their children back to school.
Right.
First of all, they don't know what the pandemic will behave like when the kids go back to school.
Right.
Then the second thing is that they don't also know where these other students coming to join their students in school are coming from. The third thing is the teachers also are staying out of the school, and you don't know where the teacher lives and what will be contracted from that place. And when they bring it back to school, if one student happens to contract it, then it means the whole school again.
Right.
On the other hand, we want our children back to school because we can't stay out forever. The pandemic doesn't appear like it's going to end soon.
Right.
So on the other hand, I really do understand when the Ministry of Education is trying to get us back to track, because there are students who are able to study at home. There are the online lessons,
Right.
and very few of the students that are in school are able to afford that. So those ones are still in school and they're studying online. Then there are those in the countryside, like where I come from, where even a computer is something they've not come across, they've never seen it.
Right.
Their parents don't have phones, so they're not able to study online. So what happens to those children and what becomes of them? So I think the best thing is to just look for modalities of getting them back to school. But what are these modalities?
Right.
We don't have the space, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have extra teachers, because even if you have extra classrooms where you can divide a class into 2 or 3, who is going to teach the second and third class?
Right.
There has to be more teachers. And then he's talking of teachers having lost their jobs, but is the government able to assimilate those teachers again in the schools? Do we have room for the students? Do we have room for the teachers? It becomes a catch-22.
And I was going to,
Esther,
I was going to throw that at you, the element of the infrastructure. Because when we talk about the children in the private sector, or private schools, can go into the public, generally the public schools are already overwhelmed, even before this. I think at some point, they had to be really like over 40 in a classroom because of the universal education aspect, like all kids need to go to school. So you're not supposed to turn away any child who is in school-going age, and they would come into school in their numbers. So those schools were already stretched infrastructurally. How prepared would we be now?
Well, I think just to borrow Jasper's word about being casual or giving casual statements, I think it is not practical, because when I take my child to a private school, I know why I took them there.
Oh.
And I would have taken them to a public school. So there are some parents who prefer private schools, and they have their own reasons. And so if my child is in a school where they are 25, I don't want him to go to a school where they're like 60.
In a class.
Yeah, there's some who are 60 in a class. And so that's a casual statement. And so the preparedness is not so practical, because there are so many things that we need to look at. Psychological preparation, financial preparation, the physical preparation, all those things have to be factored in. And so about preparedness, I think we were taken aback, because we were relaxing, knowing we were going to school in January. Yeah. So you're just thinking, well, for me, I'm waiting for January.
All right.
So I don't see preparedness.
And I think the Education Committee of the Senate really did a wonderful job providing solutions, especially in the education sector. About the infrastructure issue, the Senate was proposing that we have temporary classes across the country. We also have some government institutions being turned into classrooms for a temporary basis. But we don't see that being addressed by the ministry. In fact, I don't really recall any time that the minister has mentioned anything to do with infrastructure. Right. That can enable social distancing. So those are some of the things that have not been put in order until now.
When you talk about that, and I'm thinking about the social impact of that, if you were to use a different institution, for example, so you're taking children who are used to a particular environment, separate them probably from some of their colleagues and friends, their social networks, and then you bring them into a very different institution for them to be there. Would that really work out well for them for the learning?
Apart from that not working out well.
You've already answered my
Yeah, this different infrastructure or
Right.
this different institution
Yeah.
will require teachers.
Yeah,
If you are in a boarding school, they will need accommodation.
right.
If they are feeding, they will need people to cook for them. I don't see the preparedness with the government of having those extra teachers, because you could even take a whole institution and say, now let's have this one being from 1 to 4 classrooms for this institution.
Right.
But do we have the capacity? Do we have the teachers? Do we have the kitchens? Do we have accommodation for those students? So it's going to be quite challenging for all of us as a society. And it is a global problem. It's not a Kenyan problem.
Right.
So even if we talk about it as Kenyans, we have the entire world addressing the same. So we need to come together and look for modalities of, first of all, containing the pandemic, because that is the main issue. If the pandemic could be contained, and if we could have a way of the researchers and the medical researchers coming up with a solution in such a way that the pandemic could be stopped, I think all these other problems will be sorted.
You talk about the global aspect, but there's always the challenge of trying to balance between the global and the local applications.
Yeah.
Because there's a general feeling that we adapted how the West addressed the pandemic, and we did not specifically look for a local solution to this. For example, Tanzania went on with life.
Yeah. And they're still going on.
And they're still going on.
Yeah.
They went on with life. And some people feel that we borrowed the medication, in quotes, that the West used, yet they were a bit more prepared for that. They could go into homeschooling. Most of their people could still earn their pay, even while they were working from home. We did not have that kind of luxury. Most of our people will earn when they work. When you tell them to stay home, that's why people kept on breaking the rules. You tell them to stay home, they're not going to earn. There's no salary coming in. Is it time that we need to begin to look for local solutions, even if it is a global pandemic?
I think, that's something that I've been just talking about, and I get annoyed about it, but too bad that I can't make any change. You know, we
You
look
can.
at we
In a
look at
sense,
things, and also just let's look at Kenya. We are taking Nairobi as the model. So you're living in Nairobi and you're thinking everyone is just
In Nairobi.
okay, like you, Nairobi. People are doing Zoom classes. We have Zoom learners. You forget that there's somebody in Turkana County. Their parents don't even own these so-called Mulikamwezis.
Yeah.
And so I feel pained about it, that we just take Nairobi as a model. And when we see kids in KICD listening to, there's some people who don't even have radios. And so now if we go internationally, that is even worse.
Right.
Because if you go to the West, internet is like water. You know, that's not a big thing. Smartphones, almost everyone would have a smartphone. And so that's not a big deal. And so it is very, very unfortunate that we just borrow. You know, it's like just borrowing the way it is and then you come. So we need to look at our country. Because for me, I think about northern Kenya, northeastern Kenya, northwest Kenya, and Baringo, south. You know, people are suffering. Yeah, even in my village.
But you know, even in Nairobi,
Yeah.
We're on Gong Road right now, and not too far from us over here, there's Kibera as well. And not all of them have the Nairobi experience that people would think. I mean, they live from hand to mouth. Smartphones are not anything that they must have. Any money that comes in is supposed to feed the children that come in there, so they would work with the basics as well. So even Nairobi cannot just have a monolithic way of dealing with its issues. Jasper, I'm just thinking, if kids go back to school now, what are they going to do? Are we going back to complete term one? Is it a head start? Is it something that people are going on to the next? What really would kids be doing now?
Yes, indeed, that is an elephant in the room. And by now, the institution that is tasked with curriculum implementation, that is KICD, ought to have made it very clear to teachers and the public at large that when students resume, this is what they are going to do. Because, the kids are traumatized. So when they go back to school, they'll take a bit of some time to acclimatize with the environmental learning. And I heard the CS for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, says that when kids resume in school, they're not going to do term work. They're going to acclimatize with the environment. So it is more confusing because this is coming from the CS for Health, telling us about what is going to happen. So I think there is laxity, there is failure by KICD to be able to guide the teachers and the school at general what they are supposed to do. And then there is the issue about the academic calendar. You heard the CS speak some time back saying that the academic work for term one is already lost. There is no country in the world where that happened, where they lost the whole the whole academic term, because people have invested money, time, and everything. So therefore, saying that term one is lost was one of the most unfortunate statements.
And teachers have records of what they've taught, right?
Absolutely.
It's very easy to know we've covered up until this point.
Yes.
So you can easily go back into, if you need to revise, if you need to take these kids back, you know where you stopped and you would easily go back into that.
Yes, and that is why sometimes I argue that there is some lack of creativity how the ministry does it. Things because if you really start with experts, start with curriculum designers, they could be able to take you through that particular, from that particular kind of quagmire. So it was very easy to be able to start from where they left instead of saying that the whole term is lost. Yes.
I think the issue of acclimatization comes in at that point because the teachers here will want to tell us the curriculum had gone to up to this point and the students should start from that particular point. But are the students going to just catch up like nothing happened after losing a whole year? Don't you think we need to go back a little bit. When I was a student, I would have wanted to go back a little to catch up with what had been done so that I acclimatize myself again to continue from where we left.
And that
then
is what Honorable,
also, yeah.
Okay, sorry, even as you answer that, my question would be this. So are we going back to last year? Because if term one, I understand your point, where people need to go back a bit because they've lost some time.
Yeah.
Some of these children were not even reading at all.
It's true.
So it is difficult to start from where they left. But then we can't go back to term one as well, because if we do term one now and we're going into December, does January become term two?
The calendar year is easier to change than
Right.
having to undo everything else, because the pandemic has affected us, and that is for sure, and it cannot be reversed. So even if we are to change the academic year in such a way that term 3 becomes term
So term
2
one
and term 1,
is
we just
September.
redo the calendar year altogether. But the question again comes, what do we do with the children that were to join school this year or next year? Then it
Right.
will be a backlog going backward and backward and backward, and we are losing all the time. So I
But
don't
who is
know.
to pay? Okay, even with this acclimatization, who is to pay for this? Because we paid fee for the first term. And as you say, guys, people have lost jobs. They've taken pay cuts. Some of the students are not even coming back to the same schools because probably their parents have moved. They've relocated. Some people have left the urban areas and opted to go into places where they feel they could afford life more. Some have left the locations, the communities they were living in, because if, for example, somebody was earning about 100,000, so they could afford a house at 30 or 40, so the child would go to a particular school within that community, then this person has taken a pay cut to maybe 60,000 a month. They've gone into a place where they probably must pay at most 20,000, so they have completely shifted locations, and they may not have the money for the transport for this child to go, so they have to find another school already. Over there, who is supposed to pay for this acclimatization? Are we supposed to hold government to account so that they pay for that?
Well, I think what is happening here is that the government is talking about government institutions. And that is so unfortunate, because they should look at the child as every child, be they in homeschooling, be they in a public institution or private institution, they should look at them as the Kenyan child. Yes, or a child living in Kenya, and so they need to be taken care of. So they're talking about public institutions, and I have the CS saying, primary school is free. High school, secondary school is free. Yes, in paper, it is free. But there's so many things that you realize it's not free. So they're talking about, let me say, it's just politicizing things. Just talking, being politically correct, which is very wrong. And we are forgetting that there are these private schools that were going on with Zoom classes. So that's also, I ask myself, if you took your students through Zoom classes, now, are they going to repeat? And there are some students that don't enjoy repeating concepts.
Right.
Once I know they have covered, and they switch off. So I think about those ones also. What's going to happen to these ones who, they're almost finishing the syllabus. If they're in Form 3, they're finished the syllabus. So when they go back, what are they going to do?
You're right.
Yes, that's a question that perhaps Jasper, they need to, perhaps, I don't know.
And I think also part of the acclimatization is also the kind of communication that is coming from the ministry.
Okay.
It would have been wonderful if the ministry was certain and say, we are likely to open schools in 2 months from now. That way then Alana is able to prepare psychologically that after 2 months I'm going to a new school, for those who are not going back to the other schools, that every stakeholder is prepared mentally. So when, for example, the CS proposes the schools to open on 5th for the candidates, for the candidate classes, that brings a sudden change. And once there is introduction of a sudden change, there are things that are bound really to go wrong. So I was suggesting that part of it should be the communication from the CS.
All right.
It should be very clear and cogent.
Do you think that parents as well should have been brought into this process? Like, what you're talking about, the communication. You see, the communication initially is teachers reported to stations because we want to reopen. But there's a very important stakeholder here who is not being addressed.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I try to put myself in the government shoes
Okay.
and realize that they must also be in a quagmire or in a dilemma, because these parents, even to communicate to parents, how do we do that? You cannot gather more than 100 people at one time in one place. How do you communicate?
Technically, yes.
Yeah, you cannot. Technically, you can't.
But you know,
If
you're
you go-
politicians.
Yeah, we are politicians.
Your politicians gather like
Hundreds.
3,000 in one place.
But you see, that is just a one-off thing, and we cannot hold that into account, because two wrongs will not make a right. So if we are not supposed to gather 100 people at a particular time, how do we even bring the parents together? We cannot call them to the schools. The schools are not even in session. Some have even fallen apart. If you call the parents, you don't even know where to get them seated. So I think it's a good idea to first reopen the schools. Then we start tackling the challenges and address them as we go on. Because if we say, let's wait until infrastructure, who is doing infrastructure? The teachers are not in school. The school principals are not in school. There's nothing running in the schools. So until we get things running in the schools, if you park your car,
Right.
for 6 months, then you start it off and start moving. That's when you'll get to know, oh, these tires were worn out. This gadget is not working well. And until we do that, then we won't know what else to address. So I think the best thing is, let's go back to school.
Can I use your analogy of the car?
Yeah.
If you have parked your car for 6 months, generally you need to check the engine first.
You will not.
There are certain things that you will need to know while you're driving, but there are those that you will basically know this needs to be checked.
Even before you
Even
drive.
before you start. And my worry is this, that you see parents who are having issues even during the closure about the fee. There are quite a number of, and I think we've discussed that before, quite a number of parents who were trying to negotiate in the private schools, trying to negotiate the fee to go downward. Now, if that is not yet resolved, and you tell them take your children to school in October, and they're still trying to negotiate whether they should pay 100% or they should have a 20 or 30, 40% waiver, and they're just thrown in to go to school, they may go in, but then these issues are going to involve certain levels of debt that some of them may not be able at this particular point to come up with a solution for, Esther.
That's a good thing. Yeah, parents will not have the resources to get their children back to school like it always was. But government too. You know, we like burdening everything that we are not able to do to the government. Who is government? Where is government getting their revenue? From you and I. So the fact that your revenue has gone down doesn't mean the government revenue has gone
But
up.
Shimura, you know, we were told quite some money came in during the COVID season. How much was it for the desks?
9 million. Was it?
The desks?
Is it?
1.9 billion.
Yes.
1.9 billion.
For making the desks.
For making the desks.
That
was for desks.
I'd like to differ with Mheshimiwa as far as the role of government is concerned. In fact, the reasons why we are in this kind of problem is because of government. Because before Corona, there was the issue about inadequate teachers in schools,
Yes.
inadequate infrastructure. So this has been a systemic issues.
Yes.
And for those who are educational researchers, can tell you that, for example, the establishment of schools, there is no law that guides the establishment of schools. A certain church can start a school, then the moment the kids are about to do exams, they will ask for some 2 teachers from the Teacher Service Commission, and then the school now starts to run. So there is no law guiding the establishment of schools. So there is a lot that the government hasn't done that we cannot really say that because of this COVID, then now things are really tough on government. So it is a systemic kind of problem.
There is the Education Act.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There is a governing law to establishing a school. You can't just start a school. You won't go and put a structure and get a teacher from. There is a law that governs that. You must follow that law. And the school has to be inspected and the environment and everything. So it is not just there's no law. There is a law.
I'm talking about the establishment of schools. For example, you look at a place like Kilimani. Kilimani could be having more than 8 schools. But a place like Pipeline, where the population is so high, you find maybe there are 2 public schools. So there is no law that is guiding when can you establish a school, under what conditions. The place where I come from, Kisii, whereby the church elders sat and said we need to have a high school. And then they just began a school. They wrote a letter to TSC. TSC posted 1 teacher there. And the school began. And right now it has inadequate teachers. So there is really no law to guard the establishment of schools in the country.
How did they start the school? Because the law, they can't have started. It's either a private school or a government school. If it's a private school, the government won't give you teachers. You'll source for your own teachers and pay them.
Could it be that we have laws, but we just don't implement our laws?
We may not. Maybe that could be the problem.
Could be the
because
issue.
I can't start a school and expect the Teacher Service Commission to just equip me. Because when we sit down as Council of Elders in Kisii and start a school, how are we starting it? What do we have in mind? We expect teachers, we expect students. So how did they start? They need to start the infrastructure, knowing where the teachers will come from, where the tuition will come from, and all that. You can't just start.
Generally, what is the way forward?
I think way forward, for me, what I would say is the CS should have been consistent. If he said that the academic year was lost, yes, we were trying to get used to that. Psychologically, mentally, we were prepared. We had prepared ourselves for that. It was disappointing at first, but then it's good to just know. Well, it should have been consistent because January is not far. We only have 2 months, and Christmas is coming. So I guess we were saying, well, we've had a bad year. Perhaps we can celebrate Christmas. Then January comes, we go to school. So I guess that should have just because going to school. October, November, then they're coming back home. Yeah, it's a challenge. So I guess he should have just been consistent. He said the academic year was lost, fine, we were getting used to that, and then we go back January. That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
All right.
My thinking is that the acclimatization, I go back to acclimatization. I think that's what they could have had in mind. I was not there, I wouldn't know. But I think what they had in mind is that we take these 2 months to get the students back to school, get them acclimatized to school life once again. Because come January, I'm telling you, even parents will still say they are not ready. They'll never be ready. Even the students will never be ready. They'll say we've been out for a whole year. Now we are not ready. Parents, we have lost our jobs. Because the jobs lost this year will still be the same jobs lost next year. It's not that in January the parent will have got a job. Where will they get the job from? They'll still have lost jobs. Any industry that has been closed will still be closed come January. So that's why I was saying
we're hoping though that some will reopen.
Mm-hmm. When they reopen, that's very good for all of us.
All right.
It will be a good thing for everybody. Okay. And we will have more income from the families. So let's have the students go back to school. Let's know how many cannot take their students back to school. Then from that, we will have statistics on who to address. Because there are parents who are ready to take their students back to school. Let's take those ones first. Then let's see who cannot. Because the one that cannot take the child now may not be able to take the child in January.
I guess that would be going against equity. And
I'm just thinking about that level of disparity.
Equity will never be there. They're still learning online, and some are not. So where is equity?
Okay, so we go back to our government. If I'm a father and I can't treat my children with equity, then I guess I would say I'm a failed parent. Let me not just say fathers, yeah? I would say I failed
parent.
because if I'm taking my son to school and I'm not taking my daughters, I think that is not equity. So the government has to be concerned. Yes, I know it can't do everything because we have private schools that are private businesses, but I guess just that consistency is like, well, it's lost. So if we, like elections, if we say they're in December, let's not start telling people now, let's do them now. We said, yes, it's in December. So January is where most parents were. Yes. Yeah, they are settling. They're just trying to accommodate that, and it's like we are accepting that. So for me, that's what I would say. If I was to meet the CS, I would tell him, you should have just stuck to January.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, as I round up, I'd like to urge the Minister of Education to be more organized and to involve stakeholders to take into consideration the views of Kenyans, and also to meet some of the basics that are supposed to be met even as the schools reopen. And also, I can see we have a nominated MC here. We need to hear the voice of these leaders, the parliamentarians. I mean, we have the CDF. How is CDF aligned to ensure that we are able to cover some of these gaps? And also, finally, the backstops are the CS and also the president. You look at the US, President Trump has been having very strong views on opening schools. He has been pushing the governors to open schools. In Tanzania, Magufuli, earlier on, he was pushing for the opening of schools. It is also important here in Kenya that we hear the president's views in all this so that the parents are not in limbo.
All right. Well, we want to hear your views as well. As I say, that the verdict always remains with you. We want to hear your views as well, especially those of you who are parents and you have to take your children to school, whether they're going to public schools or private schools. We want to hear your views, so please just send in a comment, put in a text, share your views right now. What do you think is the way forward? Are our children prepared? Are our parents prepared? Is the government doing its best, or is the government playing games with us? We need to hear your views right over there. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel CJ Atemo and share, like, comment on, and share this video as well, because we might just have a part 2 of this as we keep on considering the events and the happenings around this nation, and especially concerning our children. We want to see them all go back to school. We don't know how practical that will be, but we want to hear your views. So until the next time, this is all the time we've had on CJ Scott. Keep it right here.